Yes, I hope that you have well survived the lectures yesterday about European policy.
Yes.
Do you have any questions on yesterday?
No, everything is clear.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm happy to hear this. We want today to go a little bit further. As I already said, yesterday we spoke about European policy. Today we will speak about financing programs. And I explained to you yesterday there are two major financing programs. One are the structural funds and the pre-accession funds, and the other one are the research funds. So today the program is to speak about what I call the structural funds and the pre-accession funds. And I want to start now with the pre-accession funds, or as it is called officially, Instrument for Pre-Accession Assistance, abbreviated to IPA, or if you like in English pronunciation, IPA, but I think at least also Bulgaria, everybody says just IPA. So what we want to do now, I want to discuss with you or present to you the basic principle of these funds. This means you should understand what are the goals of IPA, you should understand a bit how IPA works, and get an overview how to apply to IPA. I think I asked it already yesterday. Did anybody of you already participate in a project that was funded by IPA? As I remember, nobody. Nevertheless, I want to ask again. So what we will speak about, what are the aims of this program? Actually, it's a rather big program. Who can participate? These are called the beneficiary. What are the components or the individual parts of this program? How is it implemented? And I want to show you some examples of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And then what I want also to address is some problems that people get when they are working with these funds. At the end, there is a particular part of these pre-accession funds which is called cross-border and regional program. So this is the program for the next 45 minutes. Again, as I said yesterday, if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. You can also, which I said this yesterday, you can also write down your questions and give it to me on paper, and I will then discuss it with you. Now, let's start. This is something that you have seen already yesterday. These are what was called the budgetary headings of the multi-annual financial framework. And I explained to you for each of these budgetary headings, there are several financing programs, or as the European Union calls it, instruments. And what we want to address today is what is here in the part, the European Union as global partners. I briefly mentioned these programs yesterday, and today we have the program IPA, Instrument for Pre-Accession Assistance. So this is a reminder only how this relates to the overall framework of European policy. And I think I showed also this yesterday, Instrument for Pre-Accession Assistance. So these are programs for candidate countries and potential candidate countries. You remember what is a candidate country? What is a candidate country? You remember?
A country that has been nominated for the entry in the European Union.
Yeah, that is discussing with the European Union future membership to the Union. And what is the status of Bosnia and Herzegovina? Potential. Yeah. So that's something which is not quite very easy, but nevertheless remember this. So this financial program IPA is organized in more or less the same way as the structural funds, and I put it here, it's a precursor for structural funds. So the candidate countries get funds from this program, and as soon as they become members, this will change, and they get money from the structural funds. And there is practically not much change, except that the money comes from different sources within the European Union. So what IPA wants to do is to finance projects in the country that are consistent with community policies, with community priorities, and also national priorities, which also means that national priorities should be defined that are in line, that are consistent with European Union policies. And this means also that this program finances what you see here, structures of management, implementation, control, and audit. So it's not only projects, but the candidate countries, including potential candidate countries, should set up appropriate structures in order to manage the funds together with the European Union. Let me say at this point one remark on the presentations. I have given to Indira, a version 1 of my presentations, which I believe you will get available on
They are
some kind of
available
server.
since yesterday.
It's already available.
Yes.
Now what I have here is not this version 1. What I have here is something that I called version 2, which is a slightly reduced version. So this version 1 has a little bit more slides. This is a little bit less for the purpose of our lectures. Then I have to admit this version 1 still has some spelling mistakes, some typographical errors due to copy and paste from various sources, although I think these are not serious errors. So in this version 2, I have corrected those kind of errors. At least I hope that I found all these errors. And maybe the best thing is to make both versions available at the end. So there are some difference between what is now on your server and what I'm using here. And at the end, maybe you should get both. So let's go back to our program. What is the goal of IPA? The goal of IPA is more or less, I would say, to give funds to candidate countries that they are able to become members of the European Union. This is expressed here like this: to support the European Union free accession strategy. So the countries should develop a strategy to be able to be a member of the European Union, and for this the European Union gives funds. And there are officially 3 key objectives. So the program funds the countries that they can achieve progress towards meeting the Copenhagen political criteria. Now, what are the Copenhagen criteria? Something again political, and I put it here on at the bottom of the slide. In one sentence, the Copenhagen criteria are the rules that defines whether a country is eligible to join the European Union. You don't need to remember this, there will be no examination questions on this, but you could imagine this is part of the Maastricht Treaty, and there are some other criteria that were defined in order to specify what are the conditions, the criteria for a candidate country to become a member of the European Union. Yesterday I mentioned it a little bit. There are 35 chapters, and when the country becomes a candidate country, the European Union discusses with this country these 35 chapters. So this is related to this. So this means more or less, in plain speak, that IPA funds the progress towards the European Union. Adoption, implementation of the acquis communautaire. This is very similar. I mentioned the word acquis communautaire yesterday very briefly. You hear this very often in the context of European Union policy. Again, you don't need to remember this. This French word means more or less all the sets of rules and laws that governments, but the people living in the country become ready to act, let me say, as European Union citizens. So this is three key objectives in a very political way, I would say: Copenhagen criteria, acquis communautaire, and civil society dialogue. But in one word, in one sentence, what you see above, IPA are funds that support the pre-accession strategy. Okay? So who can get funds? And I mentioned this just before, there are candidate countries, there are pre-candidate countries or potential candidates, and you see the list. This is not only the Western Balkans, it's also Turkey, and yesterday I had on the slides Iceland, which is also a candidate country. Maybe I should put this here. And then the potential candidate countries are Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Kosovo. So you see this here on a map, the same type of countries and different colors. Now, what is the political framework? The candidate countries have to sign a so-called accession partnership agreement with the European Union, which is again a kind of instrument and a framework to meet the goals of the candidacy. This means short and medium-term priorities, and so on, which comes back to what I called before the Copenhagen criteria. And then, having signed this agreement, the countries can receive the pre-accession assistance. And the country works together with the European Union, and the Union provides guidance and encouragement during the preparation for membership. There is one particular part of IPA that I didn't put in the slides, but nevertheless it is very interesting and worth to mention, which is called twinning. There are so-called twinning projects. Has anybody of you heard about twinning? This is valid only for the governments, and a twinning project means that some government official from one of the European member states is sent to the candidate country and works for a certain time, let's say 1 year or 6 months, in a government administration as a kind of trainer, as a kind of consultant, so that the officials within the government get better accustomed to the way of working of government administrations in the European Union. You don't need to remember this, but nevertheless it happens frequently, and it is one interesting project, although from my experience in Bulgaria I could ask questions whether this is really effective, but there were in Bulgaria a lot of twinning projects. I don't know about your country. Yeah, any question? No. So IPA has 5 components, and these are the names of the components. First, transition assistance and institution building, which is a part which is devoted to governments. This means to assist the governments to build government structures, administrative structures in such a way that they can better fulfill the criteria of the European Union. The second one, regional and cross-border cooperation, which means cooperation projects between 2 countries or between several countries of the region. Then we have regional development, human resources development, and rural development. So funds within IPA are provided according to these 5 components, but there are some differences. Who or which countries can get funds from which components? And you see this here. There are first 2 which are open to all beneficiary countries, which is transition assistance and institution building and regional and cross-border cooperation. Then there are the 3 others that you have seen before: regional development, rural development, and human resources development. And these are open to candidate countries only. country you cannot get funds within the headline regional development or rural development or human resources development. Now, how much money is available? 11.5 billion euro for the period of 2007-2013. This is the whole of IPA. Now, when you read this, what I call 11,468, this is, I think you know this, but nevertheless let me say it. This is English spelling. This means 11,468 million euro or 11.5 billion euro. Now the problem is, and it is really sometimes a problem, that the European Union doesn't finance everything 100%. There is a co-financing necessary by 20% by the national governments. And this may turn out sometimes very difficult for the national governments. For Bosnia and Herzegovina, this is the money for your country. You see here the date, the years 2007 until 2013. You see the two components, transition assistance, institution building, cross-border cooperation. And what you see here is firstly the major part, when you look at the figures, the major part of the money goes to the first component, whereas cross-border cooperation has much less money. What you also can observe when you look at the figures, that the money is increasing over the 7 years. This means, this is not only for Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's for all candidate countries, but this means that the European Union wishes to start slowly. So there is a kind maybe learning curve behind this, and at the end the European Union thinks that a country like Bosnia and Herzegovina is better accustomed to manage the funds, and the European Union gives more money. In total for these 7 years, the allocation to Bosnia and Herzegovina is approximately 660 million euro. Now, so far, we have spoken about the aims, the general principles of IPA, the 5 components of IPA, the 2 components that are open to potential candidate countries. Now, what I want to address now is how IPA is implemented. Any questions so far? Do you remember what I said to you yesterday, that there is a multi-annual financial framework within the European Union? This means the European Union has a certain planning process every 7 years, at least now. This financial framework is defined. This works in a similar way here in IPA, and by the way, then also in the structural funds. Although it is called now multi-annual indicative financial framework. So this means that the European Union is not so strict with the ceilings. This was another part of this multi-annual financial framework. As you may remember, we have 5 budgetary headings, and for each of these, within this financial framework, ceilings are defined. This is not so strict here. Now, this is the financial framework, which is the budget part. Based on this, planning documents have to be set up, multi-annual indicative planning documents, which means what should be funded. So first part, how much money, then for the period of 7 years, what should be funded, and then the governments, and this is not the European Union, the governments have to set up annual or multi-annual programs. So for each year, which projects actually should be carried out. And again, indicative means in some way that there is a lot of space for changes. So how does it look like? It looks like this in more detail. You see here on the top EC, European Commission, and here we have the national government. Although, So below this dotted line, we have the national government. Now, although I put here national government, this doesn't mean that the national government can do what they want. This means they have to prepare something and it has to be approved by the European Commission. So, on top, in this picture, you have political priorities. It's called enlargement package. Then, these are the policy behind it, let me say. Then we have the multi-annual indicative financial framework. This is defined by the European Commission. Then we have the dotted line, and then below this, the government, not Europe, not the European Union, the government of the country defines what in this period of 7 years they want to have financed. What is written here? The multi-annual indicative planning document establishes strategies for each country by IPA component based on the priorities set in the accession partnership and the regular country reports. Now, I mentioned this accession partnership or accession agreement. There is some other point that I didn't mention. There is a monitoring done by the European Union, and the European Union each year or maybe even half year publishes country reports. The European Union monitors what is happening in the country and makes a kind of assessment what is happening in the country, and this country report more or less says this part in the country is good, another part is not so good and should be better developed, and the country report includes then recommendations to the country. This is still happening in Bulgaria, and Bulgaria has a member state a special status which is still maintained. It means Bulgaria is under special monitoring regime, and as Romania as well. And the European Commission still publishes each 6 months a country report about the progress of Romania and Bulgaria. Okay, so this is done by the national government, has to be approved by the European Union, and is called indicative. I emphasize this a bit because it can change. Now, based on this, we have yearly programs, and this is a very important document which is then published by the national government, which is called operational program. By component. So these are, let me say, the real documents that specify which project should be carried out in the country. Let me just ask, is this new to you, or do you know this already?
Yeah. It's new.
It's new, okay. So this is very important when you want to work with IPA to have an understanding on this. Now, if you're a company, if you're a university or whatever, you want to get money from IPA, this is the important document, the operational program, which the government then makes available, publishes normally on the internet, and you can apply for carrying out some assistance projects. Based on this document, the government publishes tenders and calls industry or research organizations to carry out some work. What, to my knowledge, the university or the faculty of information technology is doing, so they're participating in some of such projects. We have here again the components, and when I say the operations and actions, these are the people, the organizations that carry out the work. So normally the government doesn't carry out the work. The government defines all this, and then what you don't see on the slide is the tendering procedure or public procurement procedure. yesterday I discussed here with somebody the development of a public key security infrastructure for Bosnia and Herzegovina, in which the Faculty of Information Technology is involved. So there was such a tender, and your faculty with some other organizations, they applied for this and they won the tender, and now they can do the work. So this is more or less how it works, and I anticipate that this is more or less the same for the structural funds. So is it clear? Now, type of management. We have different types of management, or let me say, how the European Commission wishes to work together with countries. Decentralized, centralized, joint management, and shared management. The important thing is decentralized management, and the goal of the European Commission is to decentralize, to delegate most of the work to national government. So when you have structural funds, which we will discuss later, the management is decentralized. This means, coming back to this document, to this slide, we have European Commission and the national government. So ideally, or at the end, the national governments will manage the funds. And when somebody carries out the work here, the money comes directly from the government. Of course, behind this, the government gets the money from the European Commission. Then we have centralized management. You read here, preferred for transition assistance and institution building. You remember this was the first component of IPA. So this is a case where, let me say, the European Commission does not yet trust fully the government that they can manage the funds. This, you see here the components of IPA. These are the third, fourth, and fifth component of IPA. So this is happening in real candidate countries. This is happening in potential candidate countries. I suppose that this is the case in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And then there is the cross-border cooperation, which was the second component, where also the management is centralized. I will come back to this. It's centralized in a special way. This is less important. There is a kind of joint management. This concerns international organizations. This happens only when international organizations like the United Nations Development Program or the World Bank participate in Projekt. And then there is a shared management. You read here cross-border cooperation involving member states. So this is, I believe, a bit complicated at first sight. What you should only remember at the moment is that the European Commission wishes to delegate the management of funds to the governments or to national authorities. This means decentralized management, but they start with a centralized management of funds. Okay? Any question? Now, what is happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina? As you have already seen, I've shown you the budget. As Bosnia and Herzegovina gets IPA funds since 2007, and what I've put here is some examples of funds. Maybe we don't need to consider this in so much detail. Funding for public administration. And actually, I can say that most of the funds are for public administration. You remember the first component, institution building. So the money gets to the government, but when I mentioned the tendering procedure, the real work, for example, software development, e-government software development, is done by private companies only. So these are preparing annual planning plans. So planning is an important part that is funded. Consolidating the human resources management network through a twinning project. Is here we have the twinning. So what I said already, government officials from Western countries come to the country to work together with the government. So these are other examples that you have. you read this yourself. Otherwise, don't have any detail about these projects, so I could only read the slides. But what I thought is very interesting to put together some titles of what is happening in your country. Civil society, building the capacity of civil society to take part in policy dialogue. This means more or less working with the population in the country that they better understand the democratic procedures and principles as the European Union sees this. As I said, you can read this yourself, you can read it also later. It will not be part of examination questions. Economic development, conformity with EU law. So these are other examples of projects that were funded here. And I must say, you should know this probably better than I, how far these projects had an effect on the population. For example, improving the safety of food and feed to consumers and livestock. Thinking again of Bulgaria, although Bulgaria is no member of the European Union since 6 years, is still a problem in Bulgaria. I don't know how it is here, but nevertheless funds were given to this. Any question to this? So we have spoken about the goals of IPA. I have tried to explain to you how IPA funds are managed. Remember the two important points, decentralized management and centralized management. We have spoken about the multi-annual indicative financial framework, multi-annual indicative planning documents, and the operational programs. Now, what is the experience of people who have taken part in those kind of projects? And there was a survey carried out, and I prepared 2 slides actually to show you what are the problems. Now, when I've said that there is a tender, so the government for implementation publishes a tenders, a call for tenders that should be carried out by companies. So these companies or universities prepare proposals in response to those kind of tenders. Okay? Now the question was, what kind of problems did you see when you prepared proposals? And you see this on this slide. Here we have some very big shares of the cake. Here this is less. So the most important problem, 23% says procedures are complex. Next point, lack of national co-financing resources, equally 23%. Remember that I said to you that the projects or the programs should be co-financed by the government with 20%. So this means, in many cases, the government didn't or couldn't make available the other 20% of projects. Or the government, this also happens, requests the partners, the organizations who want to implement, that they have a proof where to get 20% more, and they should finance 20% themselves. Next problem, how to create a project proposal in English language. 12%. So these are, I would say, the 3 most important problems. And then we come to others, lack of human resources, lack of people who could carry out the work, problem with the budget in the company, logical framework. Now you will ask the question, what is a logical framework? We will speak about this in detail. This is specific program planning or project planning methodology that is very important for such kind of projects. Who knows about logical framework approach? You? Do you know?
No.
No. I thought you raised the arm. Nobody knows the logical framework approach? So you will learn something new today, which is, I hope, more interesting for you than these political things. Then finding information about the proposals, lack of PCM knowledge. PCM stands for Project Cycle Management. So there procedures to understand how to prepare proposals. And secondly, the co-financing. So this gives an illustration of the problem. Now this was the proposal. Then let me say the organization wins the tenders and can carry out the project. What are then the problems? This is different representation. Again, what you see first part, procedures are complex. So this means it's very difficult to understand. And what I have actually tried now to explain to you in a very short and hopefully simple way how all this works. But this gives you only a basic idea in fact. In order to participate, and we will come back to this, in order to participate you need to know much more how the program works. So procedures are complex, 27%. Again, this is the same. I will remind you, we're speaking now about project implementation. Lack of domestic funds for co-financing. Financial problems, cash flow, before we had budget problem on the other slide. So this corresponds to this. Cash flow means you start the project, you get some funds, but during the project you need more money in order, for example, to pay salaries, but the government hasn't paid yet. Lack of human resources, we had this as well before. Lack of knowledge. Evaluation reports. This means when you do such a project, the government, in this case, monitors the execution of the project and makes a statement, is the project going on well or not so well, and there may be a problem with the evaluation reports. This means with the external evaluators. There are consultants to the government who look at the project. Impossibility to realize what was planned, maybe because the objectives were not realistic, and visibility of the project, and what means maybe that the government is not so much interested yet. So some illustration of problems. Any question on this? No. So there are some websites. Actually, the URLs look very complicated. Look at this. So a web page, I have shown this actually to you yesterday, but I guess you might not remember the URL. On this website, WebGate, you find all kinds of tenders from all kinds of countries, third world countries and candidate countries. And here, this is website of the European policy, of the European Union, part of regional policy, where they publish more information about the funds of IPA. So this was IPA. What is important to remember is, on one side, the goals on IPA. IPA supports the transition towards the European Union. IPA has 5 components. The first 2, transition, institution building and cross-border cooperation, are open for all candidate countries, including potential candidate countries, and we have a certain management, structure and implementation way for IPA. Now what I would like to address now is cross-border programs, but looking at the watch, it is close to 9 o'clock, maybe we have to break first. Is there any further questions on IPA?
No.
Of course, you can also come later. So I propose we have a break, again 15 minutes now. After the break, I continue with the cross-border programs, and then I want to explain you the structural funds in